All right, so right now the mic is hot. This anybody that's in here is on. So, hey everybody, welcome. I doubt anybody's watching the stream right now because we just started it. However, we'll take about 5 minutes. I'm gonna let the stream run, and then we're gonna get started like around 10, like 1:10 or so. So thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found the link. If you must have if you're watching this, and see you in about 10 minutes. Right. Looks good, man.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, no. This is our last weekend of Black History Month. We do the whole call and response thing. So I don't know what that was. That was cute, but that wasn't real. So good afternoon. That's my people. Now we in the room. So my name is Janice Sykes-Ross. I am the Executive Director of West Philadelphia Cultural Alliance, called Robeson House and Museum, and welcome all of you. I'm not going to be too long. I'm going to get out of your way in a few minutes and turn it over to Chris Rogers and our special guest here, Josh Myers. So good to see you again. I just want to do a couple of housekeeping notes. If you all are looking for the facilities, it's upstairs on the second level. So instead of coming over this way where we normally
It's
go.
the same bag from Paul Robeson used, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel that.
So feel the history. And look around. I know, that's a personal note. I'll tell you that personal note. I also want to just remind some of you and introduce to others that this is the 125th birthday of Paul Leroy Gross. Thank you. Thank you. And so normally we celebrate his birthday for that one day, which is April the 9th. But this year, we're doing a whole year-long celebration. So if you're not on our website or you're not on our email list or change or Facebook or any of those things that Chris and the team is doing, please get on that, because there's going to be so many activities. We got a bus ride, get on the bus. I feel like it's going to be like another freedom ride kind of bus journey that we're going to do. And we're going up to Princeton, and we're going to let Princeton know that Philly's in the house, even though we'll be in Princeton. And then we're going to do another bus ride to New York, to Harlem, New York. So those things are happening during the month of April. We also have coming into town our honorary chairs. We have Harry Belafonte and Danny Glover, and then his daughter, Gina Belafonte, who is carrying on the legacy of her father, will be here in town celebrating with us. And we just brought on as our headliner, Sweet Honey in the Rock. So look for all of those things that are happening. As I said, I'm going to get out your way so we can get to the real program. Thank you all so much for coming.
So, hey everyone, Chris Rogers, Program Director, the Robeson House. I'm here to just do a quick introduction, but also, of course, to plug some Robeson House stuff in the process as well. So this is Josh Myers. Well, second time while I've been here at the house, but I think you were here before I even got here, or visited the house before, yeah, when you were in Philly. Just his work is so inspiring. The commitment to like writing with the Black radical tradition is a project that sort of like really inspires the work that we continue to do here, but really tried to capture within this book, How We Stay Free, Notes on the Black Uprising. So this anthology, this collection put together by the Robeson House, edited by myself and also Faja Muhammad, was a way of documenting the struggles that were at the center of the 2020 racial justice mobilization. Some, you would say, the George Floyd uprising, but certainly there were many names, many histories that inspired that moment. So this book, which is, I know Hakeem, I don't know if they got their copies today, but certainly Miss Yvonne in the back. And oh, hold up, we got to give a clap to Hakeem's bookstore. Right on. So thanks, Miss Yvonne, for being here. Hakeem's bookstore, the oldest Black bookstore in Pennsylvania, one of the oldest continuously operating Black bookstores in the country. We are so excited. Miss Yvonne, we working on that block party this summer, to where they will have a national, historic landmark placed outside the store. It's located right on 52nd Street. So it's going to be a huge occasion. We say, thank you. We lift up the legacy of Mr. Dawood Hakeem and the way that Miss Yvonne continues on that legacy of her father. So thank you, Hakeem, for being here. We always love to partner with y'all. Yeah, and this book, How We Stay Free, Notes on the Black Uprising, is available there. So we kind of moved from that into our collection, or the book that we're going to be speaking about today, of Black Study. So the last time Josh was here, what I really appreciated, and what really helped sort of set that, we not only had our conversation on camera, but we were able to really build a community after the event too, and talk about the legacy of this work and what it means. At that time, it was looking at both the book around the Howard University protest and also the book around the legacy of Cedric Robinson. And we had an amazing conversation. I first met the brother that's going to be our discussant here today, Kyle Shepard, there, right? And since then, he's become basically like a consistent volunteer and supporter of the Paul Robeson House Museum, and also runs an amazing project called Books and Bouquets, which you can follow through on the Instagram. And I'm sure Kai will talk more about that when he arrives at the stage. So in terms of our flow today, we're going to begin with a bit of a talk from Josh, a bit of a reading. He's going to open us with a bit of a context setting around the book. Then we're going to bring in Kyle, who's going to, well, I saw doing like amazing crowd work already to inspire, sort of share a conversation. And that's going to really be the main point of it. Then we're going to open it up for folks in the room to ask questions. How are my folks doing in the back with hearing me? Can you hear me good? All right. So if anytime it feels low, just give us a signal. We can hit these mics and kind of just amplify it. So we also, for anyone who comes in, we have spillover space next door, which is also a space that you can kind of move around if you need be. So if you want to watch it next door, it's probably just on like a 25-second delay, but it is on next door. Excited for after this event, continue to hang out, convene, talk, find ways to get involved in the Robeson House, because we are celebrating 125 years of Paul Robeson. So with that being said, I'm so excited to pass it off. I don't know if you want me to do like the formal, details on that. Word. I also said, last thing I'll say is that one of the things I was really excited, Josh so deep into music and jazz. I was like, man, we got to find a way for you to do a DJ set here at the house. Something, we'll figure that out. Some sort of like, vinyl set, music in the Black tradition, you know what I mean? Yeah, but I'm excited for today's conversation. I'm gonna go back to doing my technical director bit and pass off to you, Josh Myers. Hold it down.
Thanks so much, bro. It's funny you mentioned music. I think it was like 2018. I was at one of my elders, Ackland Lynch. This book was for his last book, and he read it, but he also had a band. And I'm like, this is how you do a book talk. And so anybody knows some musicians who would like to come and tour with me? I don't have any money for that. Thank you all for being here. There's so many family and friends, including old family and friends and new family and friends. I lived here in Philly from 2009 to 2013 and met many people who I now consider family in that space, in this space. And we were just saying that it's such a small town vibe to be such a large city. Another thing that Philly taught me is that I can walk now, I can go anywhere in the country and be good because I made it good. Like literally anywhere, probably in the world, and be good. Like you can survive Philly, you're good. Which is really another way of thinking about so much of what we consider to be Black life and how Black life ends up manifesting in a space like this in an urban setting, and if it's an industrial urban setting, right, where you're living on top of each other, right? And how that's probably not how life is supposed to be, and yet Black people still created something out of that. What we call it the Philadelphia sound, right? Or any other thing that comes out of this really important city. In either case, I'm following some instructions that Chris gave me maybe a month and a half ago. Actually, you had the book before it came out, didn't you?
Always.
And it was, I think it was a Facebook comment. It wasn't even like a real status. He said, just read, when you come, just read the introduction and then have Q&A. Well, the introduction is probably too long for a reading, but I'll do some of it. And when I feel the spirit move out of that. Black studies. The engineer, the chemist, the teacher, the lawyer, the architect, if he is Black, he cannot honorably engage career, except as Black engineer, Black architect. Of course, he must master the competence, the perspectives of physics, chemistry, economics, and so forth, but he cannot honorably or realistically forsake the origins of his possible person, or she cannot. Nor can he escape the tyranny of ignorance, except as he displaces ignorance with study. Study of the impersonal, the amorality of the sciences anchored by Black studies. The urgency of his heart, his breath, demands the knowing of the truth about himself, the truth of Black experience. And so, Black students, looking for the truth, demand teachers least likely to lie, least likely to perpetuate the traditions of lying, lies that deface the father from the memory of the child. We request Black teachers of Black studies. It's not that we believe only Black people can understand the Black experience. It is rather that we acknowledge the difference between reality and criticism as the difference between the host and parasite. June Jordan, Black studies, bringing back the person. We are surrounded. We who are in the academy looking for a community like June Jordan and her students in 1969 are still surrounded. We have also made it inside the gate, but we are now cornered. This place, the university, is the destination, they said. We were told that we had to be inside or else. And now that we are here, they lie to us. Just as they lied to Jordan's students, just as they lied to the Black professors they hired when they demanded teachers less likely to lie. Just as they lied to the Black teachers who went to college in order to teach those Black professors long before 1969. They lied about us, about why we are here, how we got here, and what it means to be here. Although they would eventually again shut the gates, some of us made it through and have been here for a long time now, which means we have listened to these lies for a long time now. The lies have changed, but they are still lies. Every now and then there is a slip, an exposure, a scene opens. We seize on those moments because the lie that sustains what Jordan called this system's, quote, exploitation of human life for material gain, end quote, cannot exist forever. We say, we believe. We enter a tradition of recognizing that this place and its knowledges are all, quote, a logical bundling of lies that mutilate and kill, end quote. That knowledge we call normative, objective, and therefore universal is not only or simply a fiction or construct, it is a mechanism of power, a force that imposes a particular kind of regime of truth on those who they lie about, who are said to have no knowledge to counter the lie. As we have queried the meaning of these lies, we have come up with many answers. Even as there are deeper questions we know we should ask. But sometimes it feels like there are too few of us. Left alone, left with questions unanswered, some of us feel we have to participate in the lies in order to make do. The excuses mount. We turn our contempt inward. We call ourselves imposters. We rationalize other kinds of harm, perhaps believing that in the end, the Academy's rewards will suit us just fine. We have been inside the gates for so long, there's a tendency to adjust. But even this self-criticism has its limits. For it is the gates that surround us. It is not us, it is them. It is the gates that suffocate the life out of us. It is the gates that suppress our desires, assault our capacities to evacuate the lies out of us. We are not the problem, though we have been told this over and over. And we have suffered for so long as their conception of the problem. The gates have enforced the logics of coloniality and state power. It is the settler and the police that guard these gates, who then teach us their knowledges. Only they call themselves scholars, yet their ideas manifest harm, for it is their job. In the face of such duress, such pervasive hardship, such overwhelming trauma, we must build spaces to remember that we Black folk have a tradition of recognizing that it is all a lie. Of Black studies is a remembering of that tradition through the lens and lives of 4 Black intellectuals who questioned the lie at its most fundamental core, the very meaning of knowledge. They came to the university with questions. Questions that were not simply driven by why Black folk caught hell, not simply why poverty existed, not simply why there were disparities, lack, deprivation, deviance, not simply if we were in fact surrounded. They asked questions like how the nature of knowledge and knowing itself became the structure that housed the lies, how the architecture of the lie was not inherent in the lie itself, how it must have come from some logic that preceded it. So it was not enough to respond to the sorts of lies Jordan wrote about with simple corrections, to ask whether the liars believed themselves to be telling the truth, to ask whether they understood what it was they were saying about us. There are lies and there are intellectual traditions founded on lies. There is dishonesty and there is a whole philosophy of life premised on particular assumptions of who we are. There is bad faith and then there is a panoply of interests served by the lie for those who require them. In other words, asking what produces the lie rather than what constitutes the lie is a more necessary response than simply refuting the lie. For the lie, this capacity for lying, is the very idea of the West. Should I stop? Can't stop there.
Hello. I was pretty reflective. You did. Good job. Good job.
I gotta get into June somewhere.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. June Jordan was writing during a time of great promise at City College alongside Barbara Christian, Addison Gale, Adrienne Rich, Audre Lorde, and Toni Cade Bambara, the latter of whom told her on her first day of teaching, quote, anything you have to give, just give it to them. They'll be grateful for it. She met students who would struggle to create a free university and attempt to, quote, realize the dream of a Black university. In order to do so, they would have to shut down the college as it had been known before. It was a moment where Black and third world students were not only critical of the lie, but had begun to think of alternative, otherwise forms of thinking and creating. One should never forget the roles of the artists and poets, many of whom were the original Black Studies faculty members. Their students were the ones who would continue that creative push to narrate Black life in the pages of the many Black Studies newsletters and organs and on the list of Black publishing houses, even eventually creating one of the most important moments of literary production in the 1780s. That now celebrated, if still misunderstood, struggle for a Black writing free of a white gaze emerged from Black spaces and was affirmed in Black spaces. Black Studies was such a Black space. And this meant something more profound than the racialized signifier of Black that was vitally created to order human needs. It was about experience. There was the lie, and then there was life, living. The struggle for life was oriented toward a declaration, synthesized beautifully by Jordan's poetic invocation. Quote, we are the truth. We are the living Black experience, and therefore we are the primary sources of information. For us, there is nothing optional about Black experience and their Black studies. We must know ourselves, end quote. We could oppose the lie and then live. Maybe Black studies could be something like white studies revised, but there was the question of whether or not universities truly had the capacity to do this work for and with us. Could it be a space that moved against this tradition of affirming the rationality of plunder and pain? Could it, quote, teach us something new? Most of us can say now that it most likely cannot, but fewer of us seem to be able to explain why. There's much to learn from Jordan's insistence on asking the question in the way she did and the conversations that might lead to concerning where we are. Such conversations should in fact take us far beyond the logic of the curriculum as it has always existed, far beyond the disciplines that structured the academy, and far beyond the philosophical foundations on which those disciplines depended. For what underpinned Jordan's questioning was a groping for the deeper questions of life. We once knew the university for what it was, for what it was teaching. We once knew that we could not accept it. As Jordan put it, quote, how shall we humanly compose the knowledge that troubles the mind into ideas of life? How can we be who we are? We once knew that the curriculum was blind to such questions of life. It had been too implicated in our deaths. We once knew Black studies as a struggle for a quote, life appealing to live and to be and to know a community that will protect the living simply because we are alive, end quote. We once knew that, and we still do. Surrounded and cornered within the deathly gates of the academy by a Western knowledge complex that was also prevalent and predatory to students at other levels of the educational system. Jordan, in the 1969 speech to graduating 8th graders in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, framed Black studies as life studies. She said that therefore, as you enter high school and as you undertake different courses, I hope you will remember this truth, the truth of your absolute value as a human life. Use this truth as your rule in measuring the education offered to you. Let me urge you to examine every subject given to you to study and every assignment demanded of you. Ask this question again and again and again. How does this subject relate to the truth of my life? I hope you will insist that your studies shall become life studies, Black studies, urban studies, environmental studies. The American evidence of contempt for our Afro-American lives can easily be seen when you realize that we who are Black and we who live in urban centers of this country, and we who poison ourselves simply by breathing the air, and we who swallow soap and worms, and worse than that, when we drink a glass of water, we cannot come into any classroom and learn what we need to know. Where are the central required courses that will teach us our real heritage of heroes and heroines, rebellion and loving accomplishment? Where are the central required courses that will teach us how to design and govern cities so that the cities will function as great temples of life that welcome us inside, that welcomes our lives? Where are the central required courses that teach us how to destroy the enemy urban situation that threatens all life now, dwelling inside our city walls? The curriculum was composed of a reading of history. That was a record, not of human life, but of power and war, of the crimes of dollar blood, June rights, of battles and death and slavery and arrogance and suffering. Politics was not about justice or goodness. It was about the management of those power relations created through slavery, colonialism, and death. Jordan called for an approach to study that turned away from the use and abuse of politics and power, for a study enlivened by, quote, the profoundly human wish for freedom. She declared, let us have no more to do with such power. Instead, let us take control. Let us take responsibility for the freedom and well-being of each other, end quote. What we once knew and must now be able to explain and remain bold enough to assert is that Jordan's words, such a declaration, such a demand, such a dream, were, quote, a menace to university curriculum and standards, end quote. What we also knew then was that we needed other institutional forms. We created Black studies programs and we imagined a Black university based on, but ultimately going beyond the intended historically Black colleges and universities. We struggled within Black student unions and we built intellectual spaces designed for community beyond the gates. We studied for credit and then we studied for life. There was the Institute of the Black World and the New School for Afro-American Thought and Malcolm X Liberation College and Drummond Spear and the many other examples of Black study as simultaneously invested in but much larger than what happened on the yard. These formations raise key questions about race, class, gender, sexuality, colonialism, and imperialism, and power. Yet their living archives are barely recognized in some corners. These groups and institutions housed important discussions where consensus was not always easy. Some of us believed in the materiality of our conditions and strongly asserted that it be privileged. Others felt that marginalized identities within the category of Black placed pressure on race as the only relevant category of analysis. Still, others felt that this had all gone too far, that we should be struggling within traditional intellectual spaces to achieve our goals. But there were those who made autonomy the bellwether of Black studies only achievable by departmental status. Others were just fine with the kind of structural interdisciplinarity that assumed we could only survive if attached to the traditional disciplines. As we became more and more institutionalized, the work being done outside the gates became less accessible to students and faculty. Some of that work disappeared and was disappeared. So some of us chose to become policy experts rather than organizers, a dichotomy that perhaps need not be. Some chose to be celebrities and entrepreneurs rather than intellectuals committed to the people. Some chose to try to return Black studies to the disciplines we left behind. Such compromises are the marks of a certain kind of failure of the political imagination. Yet there were also disagreements that mirrored ideological streams that went beyond the university's gates. They are still present in discussions of what Black studies should be almost 3 generations later. We can no longer act as though the current iterations of these debates were the first time that they were raised. Meanwhile, the university still produces knowledge that grins and lies. We must rip off this mask. And this is why remembering is important. I'll stop there.
So if y'all enjoy what you've heard so far and you don't have a copy of the book, I think that's your reminder and
Yes, sir.
encouragement to leave with a copy of the book, especially for those who are in person. And for those who may not have the opportunity or to the means materially to do so, personally reach out to me afterwards and make sure that you don't leave out with a copy of that book.
Sure.
I think there's importance in kind of riding a rhythm, as you've heard Josh talk about so far. There's a weight in the way that he conveys the heaviness and the structure and almost the symphony that is this book. It is a true weight of knowledge and project that he offers to the table. I first met this brother in person in November of 2021 at an event here. And I asked him a question about who are the by and by folk who kind of inspire him, inform his work, and how does that have a relationship with what he does, speaking on Cedric Robinson at the time. And one of the responses that he gave me was, if you can understand and feel the blues, and if you can understand and feel Black folk, then there's not much about our condition that you won't feel. If you can feel and understand Black folk, and if you can feel and understand the blues, and there's not much about our condition that you won't feel. For me, I was born in the city in Philadelphia, lived in Delaware, traveled back to Philly. That's when I first met Josh, started getting involved here at the Robeson house. And currently in DC, where I live now, and the reason why I bring that up, I was meditating on this event a few days ago, listening to a podcast where he spoke on millennials are killing capitalism. And there was a specific moment within that podcast where he's responding and talking about, if we only know each other as people through domination, then we really don't know each other. We really don't know each other. And in that same moment, I want to give grace to the fact that in that very same moment, there was a shooting at the intersection across the street as that was playing, as I was listening to that podcast. And I thought about, what does it mean for us to have another world be possible, another world that we're living in? I didn't need to look or to know who was there, to know who was the primary or the persons involved or going to be impacted. You just know the community, right? Whether that's in Philly, in Baltimore, in DC, there's a particular heaviness and weight that travels with us no matter where we go, within the conditions of this colony that we're currently situated under. So I'm like, there has to be a better world possible. But as you heard Josh talk about earlier, even within that, I'm thinking about Salika's work here in Philly with the bottom dwellers. I'm thinking about in Baltimore, there's the butterfly effect. right? In DC, there's the go-go music. And there's always these conditions and structures that try to, as you talk about, remove culturally and extract economically the bases of people that make them possible, right? Whether that's their sound, their music, their schools, their way of life. And yet we're still here, right? And we're still here. So I'm wondering if you can lead and kind of talk about what does it mean for our lives as a people to be impeded upon, and yet the blues remains. And if the blues remains, then that's the evidence of a beat that's still possible.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for all of what you do, but also taking the small thing that I thought was a small thing that I said and actually thinking alongside that small thing. I just want to say thank you for that. That's not a small thing.
I'll see that.
So this question, I mean, Philly gives us a great opportunity to actually think about this question, right? Every time I'm in Philly and someone asks where I'm from, for instance, and I say South Carolina, and it happens today with Rich, right? I know my people are from South Carolina, right? But you know the great migration patterns, right? It's always gonna happen that somebody's family is from South Carolina. And I say that to say that although Philly has, of course, a traditional and a long-standing Black community that doesn't have roots in the South, there is a commingling that happens in spaces like this. A commingling, do we need the mic?
Yeah, start using the mic.
How's this?
Yeah,
All right. So there's a commingling that happens, and into that mixture are people who carry this sort of, as you say, rhythm or beat. And they know when that beat is compromised by these external conditions that are imposed on us, right? But they know how to remain in line and rhythm with that beat at the same time. So there's something to that rhythm that I believe allows us to remain on top of the earth and in connection to everything that makes life what life is for Black people. And that's the thing that you feel when you're in a space, as you say, right, where everything outside, like right now, everything outside of this room is hostile to Black. Like you go outside and you feel it immediately, but you don't feel it here. Exactly. Right? That's right. How do you define that? Right? Well, we define it by looking into all of the spaces that were curated and consecrated for the purpose of sustaining Black life. And I think tapping into that, especially in a place like Philly, is the only way that our people are going to figure out the next level of how to survive this moment, or the next step in how to survive this moment. We have to figure out what makes places like this space magical for our people. And invite people who may not have experienced that magic, even though they may experience that magic in other places in their lives, right? And so we should not have to leave this space and not experience magic somewhere else. In fact, that's what liberation would probably feel like. This room is every room. And for me, I experienced that magic with music. And taking away the industry, taking away the conditions, exploitation, all the things that happen with music. When you are invited into those spaces by sound, when you're invited into those spaces by the community that produces that sound, there's something that happens that gives you the sense that despair may have a place, but despair is not going to be the only space that we have, right? Some people may get that in other places, I get it in music, right? And so for someone to listen to, for instance, Paul Robeson sing, right? And so listen to where the depth of that experience comes from. And to realize that Paul Robeson's voice, Paul Robeson's sound was literally fomented by people who were rebellious, people who were Maroons, people who decided that despair would not be the only thing. Paul Robeson doesn't become a mystery after that. Paul Robeson doesn't become even exceptional after that, even in his very, very real exceptionalism. But exceptionalism has to be forced to reckon with the fact of community. And I think for me, I have this poem where I say we have to bottle this up and spread it, right? And so that's how I feel. We have to figure out how to, not in a commodified way, but in a real way, understand what the ethics of sharing that kind of impulse, that kind of intent that grounds Black creative, but also intellectual production. When we think about Paul Robeson and Esmond Robeson and many people, in fact, his father, William Robeson, I think probably should be voted too. How do you share it? Not how do you buy and sell it or market it, but how do you share it? And I think that's a key difference in kind of moving from this space where I don't know how to respond to the violence that I just witnessed outside my window, to a place where, all right, not in terms of like a policy solution, but in terms of a thing that we can invite people into, a thing that we can offer folk so that they can see themselves within a deeper, like a different context. I think that's how I would sort of intervene in those kinds of conversations, because I've seen it actually happen, right? Urban life, like I said at the beginning, I'm not sure we're supposed to live like this. Right. Right? Dr. Bedul Allegra is here, and we were actually working with Felicia Pinar on a project with the SNCC Legacy Project, and this came up Monday. Monday seems like 2 Mondays ago. This came up Monday because it came up in Felicia's class, and they were thinking about the distinction between rural life and urban life and what it meant to sort of have access to, in rural spaces, a sense, really just a sense of your relationship to nature and your sense of your relationship to space, and how the requirements of capital required us to live on top of each other in these urban spaces, right? Space gets reimagined as something that is not even efficient, but useful for other kinds of things that don't necessarily allow human beings to interact with space in ways that they would had they had it otherwise. And so the blues is getting back to this to space, getting back to nature, getting back to the thing that holds you up, wherever that thing is, because where we are is in interruption of that. And as we know, the city, they're trying to even make rural spaces into city spaces, right? Gentrification as it happens in traditionally Black neighborhoods, but also gentrification is happening in rural spaces all across the world. They're literally getting rid of nature, or trying to subdue nature and make nature capital. And so I think the blues helps us understand another way of living. And that's why it's so important to link to our conditions, if you will.
Yeah, I want to stay there for a minute with the capture of nature, right? The capture of property. What does it mean to own something, to have something? Thinking about the magic that takes place, as you mentioned, in the blues, in our moments, in our gathering, and in us just being devoid of the gaze, G-A-Z-E, right? Of those watchful eyes. Because once you have that space, you also have to protect that space when thinking about maroons, right? When thinking about our culture, because if not, those things can be co-opted, they can be watered down. You can have our thinkers reduced to symbols and images of themselves that are no longer who they truly were. And I wanted to bring something up specifically thinking about how we can have, for some people, that same Black joy and Black magic be the first Black president, right? And that can be your extent of joy. That can be your extent of liberation and being free. But that same president and presidency can be responsible for the mass deportation the mass uses of drones on Black and brown communities and spaces globally, right? And currently, within our current administration, to have another, again, Black-led representative lead the Department of Defense, right? And lead the seat of empire, and to approach now this double down upon our universities, our HBCUs, and setting up these contracts and relationships, right? There's this siphoning of our people in very strategic and long-term, slow and fast ways, right? Something I think you mentioned it here, you say liberation will not come from the house is implicated. Right?
Where do I say that? No, you're right. The university, the house,
I
whatever.
read this book, man.
I haven't read my whole books.
I think the word is yard. Yeah.
You know how they say that some people, you know, put it back. Sometimes you become vessels to things that you don't realize you have something this. Absolutely. And it took me a long time to get there, so that's not automatic. Right. I had another joke. Not sure that I don't work for the Department of Defense.
That was Amazon. Same thing, right?
Okay. I'm not so sure. That's crazy, isn't it? For those who may not know where that comment comes from, Howard just accepted $90 million from the Department of Defense. And that money ostensibly is used to going to be used in study and research autonomous, what do they call it? Autonomous technology. In other words, artificial intelligence, creating remote control robots who carry out using to kill Black people. We saw the police units want them, and we know the Department of Defense makes that technology better, that it will filter down into the policing of Black communities in the United States, and not only all communities in the United States. And so abolition gotta be connected to anti-imperialism, y'all. So yeah, I'm not sure if I don't work for the Department of Defense. And this was done without our consent, obviously, right? This is what the neoliberal university does. It makes decisions for us and then says, okay, you work here, therefore you're a part of this, you're implicated. And it's like, no. Where is the so-called shared governance? It doesn't exist. And there is so much to be said about, I want to do things that I can't do with the streaming.
Let me know.
Well, let me know. Just anchor chief head Negroes at Howard University don't actually think they're harming Black people. This is the hard part of the critique, right? Because for them, the access to quote unquote jobs, the access to quote unquote capital, right, is not a steep price for these kinds of relationships. And on one level, there's a deep incompetence and ignorance. And then on the other, they knew that had they raised this with us before accepting it, that there would have been even more of a problem. They still would have accepted it, right? But they're kind of doing it in secret. They're doing it right and lying, right? It's really part of their acknowledgement of our power, right? And so I think Cedric Robinson's work is really important to the first part of your question. Power in his work appropriates the thing, the magic, right, that we're talking about. It appropriates, he uses the word charisma. And so it's not wrong that we feel a kind of way about that charismatic force, right? We connect to it for a particular reason. Robinson would say it's not charisma that's the problem, it's the appropriation of charisma that's the problem. And I think this even aligns with, W.E.B and others' critiques of the charismatic leader, right? She's not critiquing charisma, she's critiquing the charismatic leader. Leadership is an appropriation of charisma. Charisma, if you look at the actual definition, is grace. You need charisma. We need it in abundance, and we have to figure out how to, again, share it. But we also have to be clear about the ways in which those who come in to appropriate it and then to use it for war and murder and things that harm us, right, are very clear about how to reach us in that particular way. And so, another thing that's probably gonna get me in trouble, we celebrated when Felicia Rashad became the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard University. In fact, some people still celebrate it when she got the Toni Morrison chair, despite not being a real scholar. Despite not, yeah. I celebrated. Listen. Fashion show is magical. That's my mom that got it. And then she turns around and becomes anti-union, right? Her fine arts department has a critical mass of adjunct faculty because they don't want us to actually support the fine arts with tenure track lines, obviously. Well, maybe some of that money will from Amazon, right? But the idea that she would not support the union, the same union that is using the Toni Morrison connection that they're using, right? Because Toni Morrison was fired from Howard University.
Yeah.
Under the same rule that the union is trying to change. This is appropriation, right? And so how did she become the Toni Morrison chair? And so I made a joke on Facebook, let's just give Mackenzie Bezos his money back because they really don't know how to redistribute this in a way that helps our people, right? So Dean Rashad was also against the student protests in the fall of 2021. In ways that were hilarious, because I saw the video with her and her sister, Debbie Allen. Right? Debbie Allen was like, I don't understand this. And she said, don't talk to that. And I've heard Debbie Allen also tell the story of how she was, in fact, involved in the 1968 student protests against their parents' wishes. And Felicia kind of like told on her. Debbie's in there. I'm revealing way too much.
Next minute, all right.
Well, these are our myths. They may be applicable, but it sounds like it's kind of right because look at Debbie, her the actually after reading. Look at our mom. I say all that to say it's a powerful thing to be able to appropriate the thing that make us feel the way that makes us feel. We all love the Cosby Show. And then we realize that people make the Cosby Show are in fact in a political position to misrepresent us in many respects at the same time that we love the Cosby Show. I mean, look at class in the Cosby Show, for instance. And so universities are attracting celebrities who possess the sort of connection to a kind of Black cultural logic that don't fully represent that cultural logic in its fullness in a way like Carl Robeson would have, for instance. Which means we have to study deeper, I think. We have to study the difference between Bill Cosby and Paul Robeson. That's really important, right? In order to combat the way that our institutions, also the state, because the state can do this too, right? Have same conversation about MLK and his appropriation. Clearly a charismatic figure, right? But clearly also belief in something spiritual and religious that went far beyond the ethics of a kind of neoliberal capitalism that now appropriates him for its purposes, right? we have to study harder, but we also have to be clear and actually speak out, which is why I told you not to stop the tape. We have to actually speak out when it's clear to us that this is an appropriation of the thing that probably should be saving us.
There's a point when talking about Du Bois, you say, you know, if the price of that legibility is recognition, then we are not following in his footsteps, right?
Right.
If we're just going to stop at the places where the people are safe, then we fear what Dr. Joy James says, they will repackage your blackness and sell it back to you, right?
Mhm.
And airbrush our revolution, and there's so many different examples that you've already listed and mentioned. And I'm wondering if you can lift up, because we're not going, as you can see, in a particular order of the book, but more so a flow of the commonalities and the streams of thought that you've written about,
Mhm.
and how those people are doing particular works that echo and amplify each other's work. So in Du Bois, when he's talking about, and he's pushing against this idea of completeness, right? That his work, for a lot of people, it stops in a particular era,
Right.
right? So if you could just talk a little bit about that, more on completeness.
The part about stopping in particular era, I think that's true. I think, like, you know, for many people, Du Bois starts and stops 1903. But even if you take that, I think one could also say that it's not just the era, it's selective reading of what it's producing in that era, right? Because there's other things that are happening in 1903. If you just take that year, right? Or we just take what people talk about the early part of his life, right? 1868, born, let's say 1909, before he goes to New York, right? Well, this is early Du Bois. And then they do 1910 to 1934. Du Bois as the agitator, or activist, or and then they do these things. Du Bois is consistent across his whole life. And to me, it goes beyond, it's a way of reading Du Bois. Sociology hesitant in 1905, right? His anti-imperialist statement about the color line, which I think is airbrushed a lot, right? Probably in the 20th century is probably the color line. All right, keep reading the quote, please. He then makes a statement about how the color line is low and you have to be anti-imperialist, that's awesome, right? And he doesn't write that in 1903, right? Even though it appears, right, in the early part of so, right? He gives that particular talk, or he writes that particular essay. I think the present outlook of the darker races, 18 something, 1890 something,
1900.
1900,
Yeah.
yeah. And then he says that they write it again alongside Anna Julia Cooper, alongside Alexandra Walters at the Pan-African Conference in 1900 in London. And so even that statement, which gets liberalized and say Du Bois is a liberal, he's talking about this in the context of radical struggle and colonial expansion. And so to say that he evolved out of what? Into what? What are you talking about? Are you talking about what you haven't read yet? Or are you talking about a particular way of freezing Du Bois in time for a particular purpose? I'm not sure what it's about. Of course, ideas change, times change, but in terms of the consistent, I think, impulse, I think Du Bois, is there. And so that part, the other part, completeness. So he has a lot of statements about his philosophy of science. I talked about several of them in the text. Du Bois is really critical of the thing that he is now being considered the founder of, right? The American sociological tradition. And so I write against that grain or that tendency that we now see, chiefly among sociologists who are working to try to create diversity within the discipline of sociology. I think that's what it's about, but at the same time, they're making philosophy of science claims and also history of sociology claims that I'm not sure match up with what Du Bois was actually doing. And I say that, right? I'm not sure. I don't say that categorically he wasn't, right? I think that attempt to create a categorical or a definite distinction or a definite break in his work or a definite contribution in his work actually betrays how Du Bois felt about the work that he was doing. He was much more, as I write, hesitant about these fields, about his contributions, about what they meant. And there's this point when he's writing a letter, shout out to Toni who first told me about this letter. Philly's own Toni Montero.
They're doing Saturday school right now.
Right, talking about the same topic, I'm sure. And they reading Black Reconstruction?
Yep,
Yes.
a lot of streaming. Don't leave my stream down.
Yeah. But he wrote this letter to Herbert Aptheker, and he said that, my notion, my sense of truth is constantly under a kind of revision. I'm constantly thinking about the meaning of truth, right? Constantly rethinking how I believe truth must be accessed and must be approached. And he says that human beings never will reach ultimate truth, right? Which of course goes against the very ethic of most people who do kind of objective socialist things at that time, right? Now, I think people are clearer. But in that time, 1956, when he wrote his letter, there's this faith that truth can be reached, can be accessed if you just have the right methods, right? If you have the right approaches. And Du Bois is hesitant around that question, and he ultimately says, though we can't reach ultimate truth, we can work in the areas underneath that search for ultimate truth. That we can do a lot of work within that space. And so he uses the kind of an analogy from geometry, which I'm not a mathematician, I don't fully understand. Talking about asymptotes and parabolas and stuff. And so I use Ronald A.T. Judy's work, Sentient Flesh, to kind of flesh out my thinking around, this idea. But basically says the area under the parabola, I think that's what he says, right? Is where the working out of where our work has to happen, because we never reach the ultimate kind of horizon of truth. And then, what makes it incomplete or provisional or conditional is the fact that human beings are always changing. And so his notion of change is not like, I was lost, now I'm found. It was like, we're always lost and we're always finding ourselves, right? And so, as I talked about in one of my other talks somewhere this week, he turns toward Africa as a place to work out this horizon. And that's where a lot of, I think, the discomfort with Du Bois by certain ideological stripes comes in, because now he's talking about ancient Africa, he's talking about spirituality, he's talking about these areas that he then connects to Black life here. And the world in Africa becomes a text that really is the culmination of so many different things that he's working out in his life. His critique of capitalism, his critique of imperialism, his understanding of Black people's cultures, their humanity, all of these things. And from 1946 until the end of his life, he is deepening his deep critique of the United States and imperialism in the West, and at the same time moving towards Africa. He wrote another book that's unpublished so far, so I might consider publishing, called This Africa, right after the independence struggles of Ghana. And he says, this is where we are, this Africa. I'm gonna mess up the subtitle, whither it went and whither it's going, or something like that. And so he's constantly, again, moving towards the concept of Africa, and we know he ends up leaving and going to Africa, which is not a shock or surprise if you understand he's consistent, right? But it could be a shock and surprise if you think that he evolved. Anyway.
No, I want to stay there thinking about what I'm going to pull out was the undercommons, the otherwise, right? The communiversity is a few different terms, and I'm going to read something that Josh wrote first, and it's the section of stories are all we have. All right. It says, we had our languages and our names stripped from us, but never the real meanings of the words. Our music was attacked, but they could never steal the rhythm and the blues. Our food ways and methods for healing were disrupted, so we found spices, roots otherwise. He goes on to say, we remembered a God who came to our aid in the time of need, opening the way with song and dance in our stories. So even what you're just coming from, thinking about Du Bois, thinking about the travel, thinking about, I'm hearing Cabral, return to the source, right? Thinking about going directly to the material and the resources in the text as we wrote it, not as we were studied by, right? Not as we were examined or explored, but as we wrote it, as we told our stories. Can you talk a little bit more about the otherwise, about the undercommons, right? About the communiversity, about creating those alternate ways of being, to the extent that we can share that.
Yeah. So there's a story behind this stories, right? I think, yeah, and this is cited in the text, but Louis sent me a text message of a quote from Wynter. And I'm gonna mess up the quote, obviously. No, help me.
You got it.
And it was about, the notion, no, I'm not gonna mess up the quote.
She says that our
Thank you.
physical selves and our bodies
Do not
don't
perceive
perceive the
stories.
stories we tell about them.
Thank you. So when you sent me that text, it made me read Wynter differently. Not differently, it made me read Wynter with that in the foreground. Rather than, something that I would consider alongside the other aspects of Wynter's writing. And so what does it mean for us to be literally composed of the stories that we tell about who we are? Well, one of the things it means is that we can refuse the story, right? But then I realized, of course, that that's really what Black life has been about, refusing the story they tell about who Black people are. And that's not just a sort of, we must change the narrative. People use that phrase, change the narrative, and then, everything. It's also understanding that the story not only is a narrative that gets, publicized in like a social media meme or space, but the narrative is productive of power, right? In other words, inherent in the whole system of the story. And so for us to tell different stories is also to, as June Jordan, we read earlier, is to take control. And so where are people doing that kind of work? Where you can't do that work in the academy open and be okay, right? We were actually in the Africana Studies mixer at Howard last week. And my colleague Mario Beatty said, we experience, Wynter said blows, take blows, right? Well, why should I not expect to receive blows? But something about doing this kind of work in the academy, Dr. Beatty said, we paid a price. And a lot of what folks who are perhaps new or don't understand, what Black studies is all about is just, a place for us to have fun and think about Black stuff and, not a real serious intellectual discourse until you get into the room with someone like Mario Beatty and he says, you're about to pay the price for this space. What does that mean, paying the price? What he's saying is that we're in fact, right, about this question of not only rethinking their stories, but also talking about our stories and also having these stories enter into a deep confrontation with the whole architecture of the system that produces our industry. Not every discipline has that as its purpose. Now you have good people in those disciplines, and some of them, when they realize that those disciplines don't share that purpose, they come over with us, right? Or in other radical spaces within the academy. I think that purpose or that kind of goal, that mission is what constitutes and undercommons. I don't want to say the undercommons, right? And that is look different. And one of the things about, Logan Hardy's sort of conception is I don't read them as saying that, we're the ones that define what the undercommons is, and therefore it doesn't look like this, then you're not doing that kind of work. What I see them as kind of giving language to is something that a lot of us have already been doing in all of the ways, in ways that even go beyond what they write about. And I think they would agree with that. And so I find undercommons sort of orientations in things like Malcolm X Liberation University, for instance, or in the time where Elaine Locke single-handedly teaches race relations at Howard and gets marginalized for doing that, and then decides, well, okay, we'll do it anyway, right? Or my favorite example that I always use is Sterling Brown. I'm about to rock this Sterling Brown University hoodie that I made because that was the name of the renaming of Howard University that students fought for in the 1960s. What does it mean to be Sterling Brown University? What it means, we're actually not going to do the curriculum anymore. We're going to remake it, we're going to rethink it, and we're going to start with who we are. And that curriculum, as Jelani Favors argues, is sometimes hidden, but Sterling Brown did it in the open, right? Not in his classes, after class, right? He says, all right, I got to teach the survey of Western literature to stay employed, but after class, I'll come to my office. Right? And then in his office, he literally took these students through this whole question of the blues, through this whole question of jazz, Black poetry, on and on and on and on. So much so that as they go back into the spaces, the former classroom space, they can't function the same. Wow. Go read Houston Baker's recollection of being a student of Toni Morrison, and Stokely Carmichael is in the class. Go read it. Morrison is irritated with Carmichael because Stokely is saying, why we gotta read this and that and that and that. And not only is he like complaining about the Greek, he's trying to connect the meaning of the work, the meaning of Black culture and liberation and freedom to what is possible to be taught in the university. And Morrison was like, I never forgot that, right? Being a professor, casual labor, right? She had to teach what was given to her, right? And so Carmichael is ruined. That's the word that we use to sort of talk about what's coming into consciousness, right? He's ruined for the university after sitting with Sterling Brown. And not only did Sterling Brown do that for Carmichael, he did it for the whole generation of Black activists who were in Howard University's organization, the Nonviolent Action Group, which is the SNCC affiliate in DC. So what does that mean? What it meant was, by breaking out of this and creating an alternative with undercommons, I am now preparing you to go to Alabama and Mississippi and do what they did in 1963, 4, and 5. It was an undercommon space that provided them the ability to relate to Fannie Lou Hamer. It's not like they're the first activists to come to Mississippi, right? But they were the first ones that could relate. And so it goes back to where we started, right? How do we create spaces that are perhaps adjacent to the university, connected to them, but that are not of them, that are preparing our people to be honorable to Fannie Lou Hamer's people, right? To be one with Fannie Lou Hamer's people. And so if we take that as the sort of defining ethos of the undercommons, then it's clear, I think, that this is something that we've constantly had to do in order to make our lives, our educational lives relevant in the university.
I did bring water for y'all just in case.
Okay.
Yes, brother. We're gonna take some questions in a few minutes. In addition to questions, I think what would be helpful as Josh started this is whether you're watching it live online or in person, but also just share what you're feeling. You know, like, what are you feeling in this moment as you're listening to this? That's important for us to be able to give and take and have that co-relationship there. One question that we did kind of pull through and curate at the beginning before we started talking with a few people, for those who may not have read the book, those who may not have been familiar with you, why Black study for you as a person? And then why these individuals that you include within this project?
That's a great question, and so it allows me to sort of talk about the development of something that really started.
Yeah, like something like green.
Something sexy, their phone.
I like that. Nice word.
Right. And now, yeah. Still train. Of course.
So it allowed me to kind of connect. So when I was in grad school, one of the things that I wanted to study here at Temple was the development of a particular kind of conversation in African American studies, and that was what makes African American studies distinct as a discipline. Right? No, you really can't do that as a dissertation. I mean, I could have. I'll probably still be doing it. Right. And so I had great advisors. Dr. Nathaniel Norman said, do something doable. And the thing that was doable was to sort of trace how others have had the conversation. And that sort of led me to a deep dive into Western disciplinarity. Because in order to, as Greg Carr said, is to clear a space, you have to name space. And who's the holding the tradition in all first before you break it? Walcott.
Jack Walcott.
Yeah. And so I had to do a lot of that. So I'm spending 2 years reading like Western intellectual development and culture. And it helped me understand the context for why there's a certain approach to interdisciplinarity that gets both affirmed and then broken in Black studies. The moment that literally 2011, everybody was saying that Black studies is inherently interdisciplinary. Like, no, it's not. Right? In fact, people still say that. You look at the College Board fiasco. They're talking about Black studies as being inherently interdisciplinary. They're not even doing that. It's just a history course with some sprinkling of art, poetry. That becomes interdisciplinary. Like, look at. As Stanley Fish wrote, interdisciplinary is very hard to do because it presupposes disciplines. Right? And so I then started finding people who said we shouldn't presuppose disciplines. And some of them are in this book. So this book is very different from the dissertation, obviously. So I just took, these figures instead of having just a straight theoretical conversation. I try to bring some intellectual biography into theory and even beyond theory, because I think, theory is itself a trap in many respects. And so I had to change the form. And this is the form that I landed on largely because I think in teaching, I learned that students resonated with information when it was packaged as an individual's contribution. They could see themselves in Cedric Robinson in his development as a person, as a human. And at the same time, I wanted to avoid the notion that these are the only intellectuals that matter, or these are the only intellectuals that did this, or these are the intellectuals that we're going to put into the Black Studies Hall of Fame, right? That's not what I'm doing. And I hope that comes through. Because, there are many others who I could have written about. Someone that I talked about at the College of New Jersey, Department Chair of African American Studies is here, Dr. Kendrick Williams. One of the people that I talked about Wednesday, Vincent Harding. There really should be a chapter on him in this book. And so there are many people that do this, right? And I think the many people that do this, hopefully can be accessed by the people that I wrote about. That you can say, or that you can see the others. And that's kind of, you know, if folk can see that it's not just Jacob Carruthers, it's not just Cedric Robinson, it's not just Sylvia Wynter, it's not just the Bois, right? It's not just Toni, Cade, it's not just June Jordan. It's actually, in many respects, a tradition that creates them, rather than them creating a tradition. That's the thing that I wanted to convey. And no, I think not nobody, I'm getting into my own trap. Cedric Robinson actually made this clear for me when he wrote in Black Marxism that the truer genius was derivative of the people that they wrote about. And so we love to do the thing where we name individual geniuses. Oh my God. Besides, I was talking about Robeson earlier, right? But Robinson says, no, their genius is actually derivative. They were created by people. And so in my Cedric Robinson biography, I try to also honor that he said that it's not me, it's the people, right? And so that book really begins with the people and says, this is how Robinson got here theoretically, because he understood the people, right? And I think the same is true of everyone else that I write about in different ways. Du Bois, you know, he has to spend that time in rural Tennessee at the age of 19, which is, I think, extremely formative for him, and very few people write about it in that way. I also mentioned his first 18 years growing up in a single parent household with Mary Savina. And I think Crystal de Gregory, I had to listen to this, Crystal de Gregory did the keynote at Fisk, his alma mater, on his birthday a few days ago, February 23rd. And I think her thesis was the same. Let's talk about Mary Savina. And so that's how he gets there. You know, Sylvia Wynter gets there through dance, right? Right? This, again, this genius is derivative. Cedric Robinson comes from a Black Seventh-day Adventist family in Oakland. And I had to understand that meant something intellectual, because I had no context for understanding that, right? Jacob Carruthers, Black Texas. These people who literally said, in the midst of the largest state in the country that should have never been a part of the country. In fact, it never should have been a country for it to be a part of. They said that they're going to be self-determining Black people. And these folk all across the state create these self-determining autonomous communities. And it is that produces Carruthers. Of course, he gets a PhD later. But his responsibility is to the people of Fort Sugar Creek, Texas, now called Pelham, Texas. And so over and over and over again, in each of these individuals' lives, you can find the point in which they decided to minimize their own individual genius, minimize their capacity to be these great academic celebrity stars. All of them die relatively not rich, the ones that are made their transition already, right? And so, what is it about that kind of sacrifice? Even Du Bois, you know, he said, "Thou shalt forego, thou shalt do without." What are we willing to do without in order to be responsible to a tradition? So I feel comfortable asking that kind of question in this space, right? But literally in the space where I work, if I ask that question, why can't we have nice things too? Becomes a response. What do you mean by nice thing? What are you talking about? As if this tradition is not a nice thing. And so the beautiful part about these individuals is that they minimize themselves in order to be the carrier, the vessel for something much larger and much more important than their individual ambition. We need more people like that.
But you're not gonna get away without talking about this artwork though, Kyle.
Yes, this is beautiful.
Right.
And also the zines that you all have in your seat. Yeah.
The only offering I'll add to that, again, actually, first, can we applause and I would just say it speaks to that. It speaks to giving people their flowers, literally and figuratively. My parents are here. I have family here. My person for life is here, sitting up here in this spot. So it echoes what you just mentioned. It echoes something that you had in your Twitter bio when you work in the Twitter streets of a person is a person because of other people. And I would think like that would just stick with me for so long, right?
That's a Zulu phrase.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It would stick with me for so long. And on a personal note, during the pandemic, I was dwelling and living physically by myself. And for many people, I can imagine how difficult it was, particularly at the onset of just wondering, when were you going to see your people again? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Can I say one quick thing
please,
about that? Because
please.
I think this is one of our calls to action, and I think Chris has been doing something somewhat similar. There are many people who are in this tradition, this Black studies tradition, who are living alone as elders. And we have to think about how the pandemic impacted them and figure out something to do. So that's my call to action.
Right. No, that's perfect. You said more than what I could. So in terms of the project for Books and Bouquets, it is a cultural work. It is a co-curated with the community, for the community, by the community. There's an emphasis on making sure that we get particularly radical and liberatory texts and materials to the people. And that's it. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a business. It's not a brand, as we laughed about with Chris earlier. Sometimes in the past, somebody asked me, like, do you have a card? And I was just like, nah, this is not what it is.
Got a network, man.
Like the network. I'm like, it's not what it can we just be, right? What does it mean to just gather and be and offer and nourish each other? And that's it. Yeah. Right? And it doesn't need to be much deeper than that. I'll kind of just leave it there, but I appreciate you talking it up.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, please, questions, thoughts, feelings that we want to take. I'm gonna be biased to take this one right here.
Oh, yeah, that's cool enough to do that.
Okay.
Hey, again.
Yeah.
As I was reading, I would love to hear more about, in thinking about the academy and the kind of things that it imposes on its students. One of those things being a particular type of writing, an academic style of writing, and what's considered to be a facts-based quote, objective quote, and like serious writing, and what's considered to be serious writing. And I wanted to talk about that in your inclusion of like your poem at the end, and the folklore you included in the Carruthers chapter, Divine Speech, and why it was important to include those things into the book.
I mean, I could not include it. So there's a shift in my own relationship to prose that is represented in these texts. You may have heard it when I was reading, that there's an emphasis on a kind of rhythm. And we were just talking about this in the back a few minutes ago, and I did a Facebook post on this, and I talked about it at a talk on Wednesday at the College of New Jersey. There was a moment in completing this book where I stopped writing, and I didn't experience it as writer's block, because writer's block is when, I guess it's supposed to be when you can't say what you want to say. That wasn't the problem. The problem was I had to find the rhythm again. And I ended up stopping, and when it was normally my time to write, I played on keyboard instead of writing. And this went on from like March 2021 till May before I could write again. And this was when the book was probably the 2 chapters that I started with, actually 1.5 chapter that I started within my book proposal. And so the other, and I had to revisit those chapters after I did what I did with the plan. And so what that means for me, if I can try to articulate it, is the thing that I was reaching for in the playing and really also doing some composing was access to the relationship between the sound and the word. And it was only when I resolved how I wanted the book to sound and feel that I could write again. And that is a complete and perhaps unprofessional form of academic composition, even if it may not appear that way, because we're not supposed to feel things as academics, right? I hear this all the time, right? In fact, I probably won't name this person, but the historian was in the archives and said, I had to figure out how to separate my feelings from what the archives are saying. These are archives of violence. And so I decided I'm not going to separate that. And I decided that a long time ago, but now it's a question of how do you then reckon with the form? And so there are moments in this text where I just break out of explanation and description and get into rhythm, right? And that's sort of, and it's not fully broken, right? Because it's still somewhat, right? There's still moments where, it's, academic prose, but it's also, like you said, putting things at the end or in the beginning or in the middle that sort of demonstrate, that break. And so I think it was necessary to do it in order to, again, tell the story that needs to be told, but also if one believes in making a contribution or an intervention, then the vehicle for that was the form and the difference in order to say these things about these particular figures. So yeah, this is actually something that I'm still working on how to do, how to fully break out of it. And maybe it's the privilege of now having tenure that I can actually think about doing that. I have to revisit my first book and see whether it's there too, because it could be there. But I know now that, and I tell students, graduate students, junior scholars, that you don't have to ever conform. You don't have to ever accept that this is what academic prose looks like. You can start doing what you feel and let that be enough. Because the authority of a particular idea is the form. And if the form is connected to our people's traditions, then that's enough. And my brother, Love, who was back there, who's written about this through the lens of John Coltrane and others, probably knows exactly and feels exactly what you're asking and how we have thought about this. We were at Temple together and we're sitting there, basically discontented with dissertation writing.
Talk about it.
And so I don't know. I don't read my own writing once it's published a lot, but I have to go back and look at my dissertation. I'm probably doing it in there too. Trying to break out of this, and if people don't get it, they don't get it, right? It's not like it's the end of the world and an academic reviews your book and says, there's poetry in there. Who cares? I don't care. Right? The poetry, for me, the poetry plays a particular role in the thing that I'm trying to do. And if someone who wants to judge that based on an academic standard that's violent wants to judge that, then that's their problem. It's not my problem. So.
Right on. I saw a hand in the back to the left. Did somebody have their hand up initially?
Might just want to say it from back there and reframe it up here. Oh, you want to walk in this car?
I don't think I need a microphone.
Oh, you can take it.
We'll pick up on the live.
Yeah, to pick up on the screen better.
Good afternoon, everybody. Josh, thank you for this book. First of all, thank you to Robeson for this space, for being this space. You know, Josh, the brother asked about the feeling. I want to say thank you for conceiving, for the conception of what you did with this book. And as I'm reading it, I'm hearing the rhythm. I'm hearing all mine. I'll queer all mine, you're right. And there's a couple of sentences you wrote that I'm like, that's an Armand kind of sense. But anyway.
Yeah.
I don't have a sophisticated question. I'm fascinated by the use of the preposition of. Why? Du Bois used it. You used it a lot. Souls of Black Folk, Dark Water, other parts.
Of becoming a.
And yeah. So it was that. I was reading a lot of Nathan Dimitri Chandler, in his work on Du Bois. Talk about academic prose. I love his work, but it's difficult. And then Sean Crowley and I started talking about the differences between of and for, right? And so for is like, a word that sort of signifies a particular kind of position or a particular kind of relationship or something that is done kind of with people. And of is something that sort of signifies our inseparability from people. So what does it mean to be of each other, right? And so to be of each other is to already be in the thing, not to speak for the thing. And so with the poem at the end, I sort of, gestured to what it means for us to be of rather than for. And I just wanted to break out of, people in the academy used to ask me, like, what are your politics? Which is like an absurd question. But it's also legible in certain kind of way to a particular sort of kind of ideological categorization that people need in order to cast judgment.
Hey, that's right.
Right.
In DC, they say what you do.
Right. And underneath that is like, who are you for? Or what do you stand for? Right? And for me, I'm just of us. And so that of and for kind of dichotomy is something that I wanted to do, but also so much of it is just Du Bois. The way that he used it in his writings are actually essays rather than his academic quote unquote contributions. So yeah.
So I just want to read an excerpt of something he said today. We started talking about City College. It was a moment where Black and third world students not only critical the line, but had begun to think of alternative, otherwise forms of thinking and creating. And it made me think of, so I just read Notes for an African World Revolution, Africans at the Crossroads by John Henry Clark. In his chapter, he's writing about Nkrumah. Nkrumah, who of course he knew from the old Harlem History Club, known as a Kiwi. But he writes about all of the great things about Nkrumah, but he also mentions how some of what plagues Ghana and that independence movement is that they're still informed by Western notions of nationhood. And one of his, critiques on her work, but one of his notes about it is that Nkrumah should have never split away from Dankwa in that traditional governance. So I guess my question is, how will we preserve Black study within like that charisma of Black nationalism and decolonial work that sometimes I feel like it's lost, even sometimes in post-independence Haiti, I feel like.
Excellent question. So that's Miguel, right? Okay. I'm sure you and you realize, you knew that Clark and Nkrumah knew each other.
Yeah.
In fact, Clark found himself in post-independence Ghana, in the 1950s. And they would have known each other, of course, because of his relationship to Harlem as well. I'm glad you asked this question because I've been grappling with whether or not to write on this particular question since 2015, when I put together a proposal called States of Black Studies. And the idea of that proposal was, what are we going to do about the nation state form? Now, that morphed into talking about it through Cedric Robinson's work on the nation state form. But I think I may go back and return to this because, as you write, it is so critical. And, you know, post-independence Haiti is a great example. In fact, all post-emancipation societies are great examples. I mean, I did this course about 4 years ago now, where we started with Angela Davis's work on abolition democracy, and then we got into C.L.R. James and W.E.B. Du Bois. And one of the things that sort of I wanted to thread throughout that is not only the unfinished, as she writes, notion of abolition democracy, but also what were the post-emancipation visions of Black folk in Haiti and the Southern United States? What did we want to create? And had I known about the article, Novel and History of Modern Plantation by Sylvia Wynter, I would have included that article. I think I may have known about it, but I haven't read it yet. I would include that article in the conversation because it's the Blacks that matters in post-emancipation Black life, the plot or the provision ground. And I wish I had my copy of Shirley Ann Williams's collection of poetry, Sweet Angel Child, Some Sweet Angel Child, where she actually has a poem called Provision Ground. And she's actually talking about Howard University as a potential provision ground. That's how radical 1968 was at Howard. And so it's there where the work happens, but also where the idea of what we're going to be is actually addressed. And we know very quickly, almost immediately, that those post-emancipation visions become violently suppressed. Immediately. Right? How long did we have to work it out? Think about Reconstruction, right? 5 years, maybe? 7? Not even that long, right? In some places. Before the violence came. Think about it in the context of Haiti, right? Very complicated. We talk about the Haitian Revolution, but slavery was abolished in 1794. Right? 1791, 1804 is the revolution, but slavery is abolished in 1794. Why are they still fighting? If slavery was abolished. It's because they had a dream of what they wanted to do with that particular land that the French could not abide. Meanwhile, the French are fighting the British and the Spanish, but the French also say, y'all gotta go back and grow some sugar. But we just fought not to grow sugar. Okay. And so for me, we have to figure out this vexing problem of how to live amid the imposition of this form called the nation state, which even our revolutionary dreams are forced into. And I spent 7 days in Cuba recently, and you can see, as we talked about earlier, this magic is there, right? It was immediately familiar to me. Even in the pressing context of the United States embargo, that the people still possess this particular magic. And the problem is perhaps, can the revolution continue to tap into it? Can the Cuban Revolution continue to tap into it? I think it's possible, the form is flawed, and that's the nation state. And so we talk about Cuba in terms of relations to other states. We talk about Cuba in terms of multipolarity and other things that, of course, if you're an international relations figure, then these things make sense. But does it make sense to the question of how people live? Perhaps, but should it always? I'm not sure. And, you know, Cuba also has a post-emancipation, of abolition and emancipation vision too. That it's, in many ways, is responsible for the very revolution that happens, right? And it's interesting because many figures in the revolution absolutely understand this, right? But there was never a true attempt, because of the ways in which states function in terms of the international community, to fully reckon with the form. And we can say the same thing about Burkina Faso, for instance. Say the same thing about South Africa, right? We have these beautiful revolutionary moments that then get filtered into whether or not you're gonna have a voting seat in the United Nations. So, okay. Yes, but also what else is there for us? What else is possible for us? And it's a hard question, which is why I haven't written a book yet. It's literally like, okay, but also, so is abolishing slavery a hard question. Right? And so I think, you know, we shouldn't avoid it, because those contradictions literally are harming us. They're harming the Cubans right now, right? They're harming Haitians right now. They're harming all of us right now. So.
Just one thing, just on that, to Josh, to your credit. Oh, yeah, just. And Josh doesn't like to say these things because he's like very humble and all that, but to John's credit, when I did my interview with Sylvia and you read it, and everybody was focusing on the second half of the interview when she was talking about language and police and all this stuff. You said what she said in the first answer about refusing the cheap and easy radicalism.
Right.
She said, we cannot afford any longer to simply reorganize the state, right? Even with a Marxist agenda, you are still working inside the enclosure offered to us by colonialism, and that you have to refuse the cheap and easy radicalisms. And the hard part is grappling with who we are. If we don't answer that question, then we cannot break out. And all of the feedback I got from that was focused on the second half, where she really gets into her winter bag about police's initiation. And Josh sent me a text message. He said, they don't want to hear what she's saying in that first answer about the state.
I don't want to hear what you're thinking.
Yes, and he is one of the only people that focus on that part of the interview. Everybody else was really wrapped up because she's a poet. I mean, she's an artist, so it was beautiful. But that first answer, Josh was really like, well, let's set it off, you know, that first answer. So to his credit.
Gotta give a shout out to.
No.
Let Josh do it. Let Josh do it.
No.
So don't do that. I thought we could do a library who works at Princeton and University of Austin. And so she is now part of the Philadelphia community. We're going to initiate her right now. Yeah. So when her book comes out, we're gonna do episode 3 of the Josh and the Doer conversation. Episodes 1 and 2 were this year of my book, so episode 3 will be here at Robeson House with her book, when her book comes out. It's called The Interminable Catastrophe.
Let's take one last question and then allow Josh to kind of provide some closing reflection.
I really appreciate the book and scholarship and the thinking that really put in into this work. First thing this wasn't a question at first, but this whole conversation I just finished William C. Anderson's A Nation on No Map, which like is speaking to what this is, what you were speaking on.
Right.
I'm going to speak about exposed to and when we get exposed to it. I recently, last year, first time I ever heard of Sylvia Wynter. Last year, the first time a couple of years ago, first time I heard of Cedric Robinson and all these figures, and thinking of the Cade of 12 space, which I work in, how
do we bring this to the masses? And how do we distill it in a way where we can build off of these ideas and have our children exposed to it in a real authentic way? Because, you know, thinking of curriculum and how it's done, like, I never heard of Jordan's work until I read it in that introduction. Now I had to go and download it and read that chapter from that book, you know? And it blew my mind that I never even heard of it before. So I just want to hear your thoughts on how do we bring that to the masses, you know, those on the corner, you know what I mean, outside, but also our children, so they can, you know, think of and imagine something larger than this right now.
So one thing you can do is, you know, Chris and Paul Robeson, y'all can take that grant that y'all just got.
Whoa,
This is the joke too. You put a speaker on the outside.
oh, when it gets warm, block parties are coming, so you don't talk about it.
You can bring something in the house. I'm thinking about August Wilson talking about culture. And I'm going into the Hill. What was it in the Hill District? The club? Yeah. Everybody couldn't afford to hear Coltrane. So people would literally gather outside the door of the club just to get a glimpse. And so we can you know project this to the street, literally.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a very Philly thing to do. But on a serious note, I think, you know, you asked a question that you know you're also already doing that work. Another humble one. How do we lengthen and strengthen that work is of course a question. We gotta support you, number one. Y'all know who that is, right? Say who you are, please.
My name is Bookended. Director of social Philadelphia. They kind of messed up.
So we've infiltrated this blue district. Literally. And he had me talk about Black studies at a PD in December, and it was the same time, literally, right? And so, Billy, I put a hedge around him, hedge of protection. Support him, because part of the answer to your question is what you're already doing. Not all of us can infiltrate. And we have to be able to figure out how to support those that can. But in terms of like mass education, the course that I mentioned earlier that we're producing, the SNCC Legacy Project, we're, you know, as everyone is crying about the AP and College Board and the capitulation, which you should have expected, we're creating our own courses, right? Somebody messed up and gave Courtland Cox money. Courtland Cox, veteran of the movement, you know, director, secretary of the 6th Pan-African Congress, also now the chair of the SNCC Legacy Project. And so they gave him money. Foundations after the, you know, uprisings, they were just handing out money. And so they gave some to the wrong one. And so this money is now being used to develop courses about the movement by the movement people. Have never been such a thing. Now, we have people in movement teaching in the academy, but we've never had a systematic attempt to build a curriculum on the movement by people who were in the movement. And so we're all working on that. We have, by the end of the summer, we will have 4 courses done. And these courses are ostensibly college courses, but since we're in the room, we know they have to go beyond the college. And so they're going to be tailored courses that can be taught in community spaces and organizing spaces and community college spaces, and of course in the research university, should you choose to be located there. And we got to figure out how to get teachers, right? And so with these courses, again, we're trying to figure out that question of everybody not going to be, you know, in university, so on and so forth. Another initiative that I hope I can announce, Abdullah Kalamat has gathered several Black studies scholars together
to create what we are now calling Intro for All. And so, is it Sunday? Tomorrow Sunday. We meet every Sunday. Oh, I missed the meeting. Because he's been getting on us about missing meetings. So Dual is one of those disciplined Marxists, so I love him. He's very disciplined. He uses words like cadre. We're the cadre. So Intro for All is conceived around what would a Black Studies course be if it were attached to the needs of working class peoples. The very specific needs of working class peoples. And so we're working on what that would look like, and we're trying to create that. And of course, the Dual, alongside others, is Tasneem here? Tasneem Siddiqui, who's now at Drexel.
Shout out to Cade,
Yes,
organizational member of Robeson.
yes, yes. And James Pope, African World Now Project. There are people who are actually in the community involved in the direction of this course. So we're not, academics saying, here's what y'all need, right? This is a collective process. And so we're bringing our resources to the conversation. And yeah, we'll see what happens, but it's called Intro for All. And again, showing how we can self-determine certain things when it comes to that particular question. And all of these courses are using the technology that has now been made available. We got to figure out how to protect it, of course, that allows us to reach people in places where they wouldn't normally have access. And so I'm skeptical about the technological part, but I know there are some people that know how to liberate technology too. And so we got to get them into that conversation. I laugh all the time because I don't think I've ever listened to a podcast from start to finish. And people who kind of see me in the street, oh, I heard the podcast. Well, you listen to podcasts. But people actually listen to podcasts. And so this technology, I'm not convinced. So I'm like, if I'm gonna have my something playing, it's gonna be music. Anyway. But people, I'm shocked by the way that that form travels, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can put it in that package, we can reach people in ways that even surprises people like me. And again, we have people that know how to do that now. And we're connecting to them, and we're gonna figure it out. But you at the school district, man. And I'm thinking about Asa Hilliard. I'm thinking about Baba Asa because Asa says, don't abandon the public schools.
Yeah.
Leave it at that. We gotta give it up. No, I just want to say thank you for really shepherding this conversation and the feeling and soul that you brought into just this conversation. This is amazing. I hope it's not the last time we talk about it. And Josh, just, always thank you. And, we continue on the work that we do at the Paul Robeson House to make some connections. So you mentioned Dr. Siddiqui.
Yes.
And Dr. Siddiqui, just, what was it? No, it was had to be like late November, December. But Dr. Muhammad Ahmed, we were able to host him here at the Robeson House. We had like a 3-hour long conversation about recovering the legacy and the many different contributions to movement work, the liberation struggle that he was a part of, and grounding that in Philly, right? And that was just part one of what we know to be like a much longer collaboration about having these conversations. And it connects, because we just launched next door, the Esplanda Robeson Reading and Resource Room, right? For folks who may not be familiar, Esplanda Cardozo Good Robeson as Paul Robeson's life partner. Paul Robeson's initial career manager was integral to shaping who we know Paul Robeson to be. There's a biography of Barbara Ransby that was just reissued in Haymarket Books last year. I highly recommend it. And the work of the Robeson House is about continuing on this tradition of Black study.
And with that, we invite everybody in this room to think about ways you can continue to be involved and we can connect. I know we got to sort of like end the formal conversation now. No, Miss Siobhan don't even like working Saturdays. So I want to make sure we get her out of here on time. Give these folks some. Shout out to Siobhan. See you. But we're going to set it up so we can get, so if you haven't already grabbed the book, we have today, and we'll make sure we get those out. Other than that, we're gonna like really kind of make it like a social experience. I will say, No Names Book Club is meeting next door. They're gonna be upstairs in the lobby, Robeson resource room. So if you want to join and be part of another conversation, there's opportunity for that. I'll let you know. And other than that, if I can have a couple able bodies to help me move some of these chairs out the way, and we can just relax. And thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm stopping the stream, right? No, say what you need to say, brother. No, go keep it going.
Just for the record. I was not, I'm gonna see it. You got on the record.